Huge win, biggest win since, well, fill in the blank. Maybe we'll ask that question. You guys can let us know in the chat. I'm thinking, maybe last win against Clemson in 2014, ACC championship game 2014. That's the last time that, of course, Florida State won the ACC, went to the playoffs. So this might be it right here. Or, hey, it could be the biggest one since last season opener, because that was the win that catapulted the 10-win season that may have been the difference between Mike Norvell and that program continuing on that 5-win path, and maybe that was the turning point. Regardless, we know it was good. Florida State over LSU in a big way in the second half, 45-24. We got George here to help us bring you on through for the next 60 minutes here at the Voice of College Football. Join George on a Renegade Report. We will leave the link in the chat. All right, bring your comments and questions. George, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Just the 24 hours is kind of worn off. The celebration. Monday was the fun, kind of sobering drive home back to Milton, getting back to work and reality, but we're doing good. Looking forward to get that home game a little bit closer to home. We got a night game, so a little bit of time to rest up. We don't have to rush down there and be in Tallahassee too early. So we're feeling good in Old Nation, liking that number 4 ranking in the AP. It's good times. I would say if you're going to, talk about, what that is kind of shades of as far as the win, I'd liken it kind of that 2013 time when we went down to Death Valley and it was Clemson number 3, Florida State number 5, 2 top 10 teams, and we handled business, kind of blew them out. It remains to be seen if the rest of the season will be like that, but that's kind of the feeling of it, how it feels.
Folks, leave those comments and questions. We're talking Florida State football with all of you. And again, the Noles defeat LSU. Southern Miss is straight ahead. We've got a SB Nation guy, Steve Helwick, going to stop by and give us a take on Southern Miss. And the wins are enormous. You got to celebrate this, but time to move on, time to look ahead. You can't look past anyone and take care of business from week to week. I got to think that you checked out Clemson and Duke. I know that I did. And that was a bit of a stunner.
There's no doubt, not to anger the Clemson fans, I will say Clemson's fan base is one of the most level-headed and down-to-earth when it comes to their team, the way they take stuff.
Okay.
It was tough, man. It was kind of one thing I was wondering heading into the season, because when Chad Morris left, he didn't hire somebody to come in there and run their own offense, et cetera, et cetera. Tony Elliott and those guys came in there and they ran the Clemson offense, the Chad Morris offense. Well, you bring in a guy from TCU that just made it to the national championship and is running like kind of the offense, the kind of sexy offense in college football right now. And Garrett Riley, he comes in, and sure enough, he was there to run the quote unquote Clemson offense, not the Garrett Riley track meet offense that scored all those points for TCU last year. And it looked like the same offense. It looked like last year's offense. And DJ Ukulele, meanwhile, threw for like 400 yards and looked great. I believe he had, a top 10 quarterback performance in all of college football this in week 1. So I don't expect to see that Clemson every week. Really in that game, the score is kind of a misnomer. They moved the ball a ton. Kind of everything that could go wrong went wrong. I believe they got like within the 10-yard line 2 or 3 different times and got no points. They had that fumble on the goal line for a 14-point swing. It was actually a 15-point swing because they got a 2-point conversion right there. So tough for those guys, but I'm not planning on seeing that same team when we make it down to Death Valley. But it was eye-opening. They're going to have to, take a look in the mirror. And Duke, all of a sudden, looks like it could be the toughest ACC game on our schedule. We'll see.
Could be. They were impressive. There's no doubt. The score, again, was misleading. It was a close game. And as George said, Clemson outgained Duke. And up until the last couple drives of the game, they must have had a huge lead in total yardage, but too many mistakes, and Clemson's got their issues to work out. And they've got a couple of what you would consider near scrimmages in, I think, Charleston Southern and FAU before the big showdown in Death Valley. So before that, Florida State's got Southern Miss and BC, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, certainly check out our post-game show with George. George and I got together right after the game, so check that out if you have yet to do so. And keep in mind that George is here after every Florida State game for post-game reaction with all of you. Well, George, we'll start to go through everything before we get some comments and questions coming in. And was there anything in that game that surprised you?
In the FSU LSU game?
Yeah.
Anything that surprised me? I'll say the play of DJ Lundy. We talked about it. You and Logan talked about it when he was on here. He's really had a great camp. But, man, he's got an argument that he was maybe the best player on that defense, outside of the defensive line. Like, he really Tatum Bethune had a great game, but, man, he had 9 tackles. He led the team in tackles. He made some real impact plays in that game. DJ Lundy really stood out to me. On the offensive side of the ball, throughout camp, Alex Atkins and Mike Norvell both said, look, we've got 8 guys we think we can win with. And, normally when coaches say that, you take it as, okay, we've got 5 guys, and then if there's injuries, there'll be somebody to step up, et cetera, et cetera. But it appears, no, they're going to just rotate this offensive line like a defensive line. They're going to use all 8 every game, depending on matchups. If the other team makes a change at halftime and there's, say, a more athletic, smaller defensive tackle at nose guard versus a big 320-pound guy, they may switch Maurice out for Keandre Jones. They may put Byers in at tackle, or Bless Harris over Robert Scott at tackle when they're going to want to run more trap and counter plays. They want somebody more athletic in there. It's I'd say that was probably the coolest thing, most surprising thing about, I guess, the difference between the past Norvell teams. That offensive line is really a strength of the team, and they truly have 8 guys that they're going to rotate throughout there.
It's hard to be critical of a team that went out and scored 31 straight points in the second half against the number 5 team in the country. And while LSU may not be quite that good, they are definitely one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the country. So Florida State was able to do that against a team, again, that I expect to start going on a roll, win plenty of games, whether that turns out to be 9-3 or 11-1, whatever it turns out to be. They certainly have tough games that lie ahead. So they're a top 10 to 15 team in the country. So to be critical is going to be difficult. But is there anything in the performance that Florida State put out there Saturday night that you would say, okay, I would like to see us clean this up or clean that up?
On our end, it was a really good game. If you're going to call anything out, I complained a lot about the referees and the officiating of the game and that immediate reaction podcast we did. But at the end of the day, you can't have late hits. You can't hit guys out of bounds. So I say that's one thing. Eliminate the unsportsmanlike conduct penalties and things of that nature. There's no reason for it. At the same time, you're not going to be too critical of it because, it was that aggressiveness and that hard-hitting kind of swagger and chip on their shoulder they had that really was able to make LSU quit in that second half. But you don't want to get a label of that or, have it be a regular thing where you have multiple unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. It's hard to find a fault in the gameplay. Johnny Wilson has got to – I don't know what it is. It's like he had 7 catches for 100-something yards and 2 PI penalties, for first downs. That's 15 yards a pop. So really 9 first downs. Every catch he made was for a first down. But then just the 2 egregious drops. Yeah. So it's like if he could just eliminate those 2 drops, that's part of what kept that first half so tight And back to what you said about LSU being a top 10, top 15 team. I mean, they had the lead at half. This thing was 17-17 with like 3 minutes left in the third quarter. So they were no slouch.
Nope.
These games at the championship level and at the elite level, top 10 in the nation, it comes down to when you get to that fourth quarter, you kind of find out you separate the men from the boys. And we saw that separation in that game, but there's not many teams in the nation that bring the same level of depth and intensity that we do. So they should fare a little bit better. I saw something on Twitter. A guy put it was like, that was a tough game for LSU and everything, but LSU still has to face such and such and such team that's even more physical than FSU. So I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not sure what that guy was talking about, the whole SEC thing, but this team is just Alabama is going to be right up there. But outside of that, there's not going to be another defensive line they're going to play or offensive line that's like Florida State's the rest of the year.
Yeah, I would agree with that at this point, unless Texas A&M proves to be much better than they've been. I'd say from a recruiting standpoint, you could certainly rank them up there, but they haven't done it.
Yeah, A&M has some guys. There's no doubt about it. They've got some, 5 stars and studs. I just don't know if they have the depth, I guess you would say, that they just the experience or whatever. But they have the guys that could come out there and, they could definitely get into it and get into a groove and develop in the next couple of weeks for sure.
And about the dropped passes, this is where I stand in the dropped passes, because I think it drives all fans crazy when they see a guy that's got serious athleticism. And if for anybody who's got decent athleticism that's sitting at home on their couch, they're thinking, how's he dropping that pass? I would catch that pass. It's the one thing probably in football that you can picture yourself doing. And that's why fans can't let it go, because if an offensive tackle is getting blown up by a Jared Verse type to the quarterback, well, yeah, he didn't do his job, but none of us could imagine in any way that we could stop Jared Verse. So, and all those other, anything else I can think of, you can't really picture yourself doing. But, catching a pass over the middle with nobody around, a lot of us could do that. I will include myself. However, it's different. Number one, when you're out there. Number two, they're catching a zillion passes. So it's going to be, everybody's going to drop a pass. It's not like you can be 100%. I think Hunter Renfrow once went a whole season without dropping a pass, but that's like unheard of. It's just that you can't catch 7 and drop 2. And when it's 2 of the first 3, or maybe the very first 2, that's when it really stands out. These receivers, they need to be catching 30. I don't know what the statistics show. I'm sure there are advanced metrics on this that I haven't seen, but they need to be catching probably 30 or 40 or 50 between every drop. So it's just, a drop should be extremely rare. It should be like a field goal kicker missing a 30-yarder kind of thing. So that's what drives people crazy, including me, about dropped passes.
The thing with Johnny that's so infuriating about it is, like, he catches all the tough passes. It's always the one where he's wide open, just standing there. To your point, it's the pass that we think we can catch. He wants to make a play so bad. He's like, oh, I'm wide open. I can just take off and run. It seems like, and he just loses that focus. It's any kind of an ability thing, but it is what it is. If he keeps doing what he's doing, I think he'll be all right. If he could get rid of that, if he could become like a security blanket type guy, as well as the big play guy that he is, man, I mean, there's really not many guys out there, any kind of D-backs that are going to stop a 6'7" guy like that.
I'm going to take us, George, from the focus on this specific game to a big picture question, because we've talked about this on this show a few different times since Florida State started to turn it around about October of last year, but I don't think you have been around for this discussion. When did you know? Was it a game? Was it a statement that was made at a press conference? Sometimes the light goes off. at what moment, maybe it was a play, maybe it was a score, that you pretty much knew, okay, Mike Norvell is the guy?
That's a very, very good question.
And while you're thinking of it, I'll basically say I did defend the guy early in his career for a number of reasons. The expectations are extremely high. He was given a roster that had talent on it, but not anywhere close to Florida State talent. There were all sorts of issues in the locker room, lack of discipline, lack of focus, lack of the work ethic that builds champions. He had to clean up a lot, and a losing mentality. And the first time he gets thrown into it, he can't communicate with his team. He can't meet with them. He can, yeah, they did Zoom calls and all that business, but he can't coach them. So he goes into his first season with about a couple practices in the spring and then a very truncated, shortened fall practice. And he's got to hit a field with, players that are trying to learn new terminology and new schemes and build relationships with coaches and all that business. And he's trying to overcome the end of Jimbo Fisher and mostly Willie Taggart's nonsense. So he's trying to overcome all that. So I gave him a long leash when it comes to that. Now, the 5-7 season had its good and bad. Obviously, 5-7 is not acceptable, but they did bounce back from 0-3 and show some good signs. And I thought that they made some headway, and then they break out the next year. And there was somewhere in there that I thought, okay, I know this guy can coach. I know that he was a really good hire, and I thought he was, but I couldn't prove it until there was a turning point early last season that I thought, okay, they're going to be good, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. So everything you said was spot on. He comes in that COVID season. That was just a nightmare. I mean, the first 18 months he was on campus, I believe he couldn't travel to see recruits. You can't recruit. Like you said, he only ended up with a couple spring practices. He ended up playing 9 games that year. I pretty much gave him a pass for that whole 2020 debacle. Even the teams that were good that year, it was kind of like the NBA. It was like, where's Waldo, with like teams that normally aren't. All of a sudden, like a Florida just has a random like great year in 2020. It was just a weird year all around. Then you go into 2021. I really liked what he did in the portal. I had high hopes, and I'm starting to feel pretty good. I'm like, all right, we're going to see what Mike Norvell is about. You get off to the hot start. No. I'm thinking I got my years mixed up. I'm talking about 2021. You start out 0-4. You don't get off to a hot start. It's looking really bad, and it's getting tough. You start off against Notre Dame, and I'm feeling really good. The whole fan base is feeling really good after you take Notre Dame to overtime, and I'm thinking, okay, this dude called a ball game, and then you end up dropping the next 3, including a game against Jacksonville State. You're like on the edge. Everybody's freaking out. Like you said, as an insider, I kind of knew. I wasn't really an insider, just a die hard at that point in time. You knew everything that went into it, the APR restrictions, the kids from the Willie class trying to mutiny over social media the previous year, all the COVID issues, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to pass judgment. And then that Louisville game happened. And in that Louisville game, in the second half, it was like something clicked. All of a sudden, you saw what they were working towards on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. You saw a spark of progression. And then they went on that run. They win 5 games. And ever since then, there's been a clear kind of arc. I still had question marks about whether, it was going to be a national title type of thing or if he was just going to be an okay coach. But the LSU game to start 22 is, I guess, when I thought, okay, this is a dude that's going to be here for 10 years. That's when I thought he could really do it. When he won in that kind of atmosphere to start the year and then went on to win 10 games. But 2021, that 5-game stretch really, really showed me what was possible. You realize Jordan Travis is your quarterback, is I guess when things really got on track. And you started, it was almost like maybe that's what it would have looked like in 2020 if it would have been a normal situation for Mike, you know.
Yeah, good call on the Louisville game. Now you're sparking my memory because that was, I believe, a Friday night game. And Logan and I got on after that game, and we both were thinking the same thing. We both had the same points that, number one, that team hadn't for a long time hit a bunch of adversity and overcame it. You know, they're playing a decent team. They're on the road. Jordan Travis goes down. Tate Rodemaker comes in. His first handful of passes were shaky. He throws a pick. You're just thinking it's coming off the rails at that point, but they pull together and they pull out a really significant win on the road. And that was
that's
really
a
the
big win
first.
last year, but actually the Louisville game I was talking about was in 2021. We actually lost the game.
Okay.
But it was the last of those 4 games in that losing streak. We went down like 31-7 or something in the first half. In the fourth, it was the 4th game of that losing streak, and it was like you thought that was it. This team was going to lay down on Norvell. It was going to be over. But they came back and fought back and almost won that game. They went on to score like 21 points or something in the 4th quarter. And then after that is when Jordan Travis took over as the starting quarterback and went on to win, you know, I can't remember the 15 or something, you know, went 15-6 after that. Like it's when he started his run. So that's what I meant. But that game absolutely last year was that kind of cemented the backup quarterback. That was huge to see that last year and see that team overcome that. But yeah, that 2021 game against Louisville at the end of that streak is kind of what I guess the first sign that Mike Norvell was going to be the guy for me.
Folks, we're here every Wednesday at the Voice of College Football, breaking down Florida State football with all of you. 6 o'clock Eastern time. We got George from Renegade Report. We'll leave the link in the chat, but it's easy to find Renegade Report right here on YouTube. So join George there. And after postgame, meaning after the Southern Miss game, George will bring you postgame and answer your comments and questions right here at the Voice of College Football. We've got an Amazon link. It's in the description section. And here's the deal. If you grab that link, I am telling you, it's going to be exactly like you're going into Amazon the way you already have. I've tested this with like 20 people. So please use our Amazon link. That helps us grow and build the channel. It's right there in the description section. All right. Let's see what we've got in the chat.
Absolutely. Hummus hero. I like that.
Yeah. Evidence of why programs should be patient with coaches trying to rebuild a program.
Florida's dealing with that right now with Billy Napier. They got a decision to make here in the next 18 months or 12 months, what they're going to do with him.
They do. And
what's up, Robert? Man, it was great seeing you. That tailgate, man, Saturday night, Sunday. Whew, what an experience. It was a lot of fun hanging out with those guys. It was a lot of fun. The win made everything a lot better. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun watching the LSU guys right there at the end of the 4th quarter, making their way down Church Street.
Like you said to me before we came on, it's a long trip regardless, but when you get that smile on your face from a win, it's a whole lot different than when you got to drag yourself all the way home with a big fat L.
There's no doubt that trip home after a loss would have been rough. I mean, it was rough with the victory and having all the fun podcasts to listen to and everything like that. But yeah, it would have been rough with a loss. There's no doubt about it.
Tally 850. Did you see this, George? Communication issues between the secondary?
Communication. You know, that first half, there was a bit of sloppy play. I don't remember particular communication issues. There's one play that a lot of people have talked about where Kevin Knowles was kind of midpointing two players in zone coverage, and they kind of think it's the thing where he took the wrong guy or it was a miscommunication. But I forget who it was kind of pointed it out on Twitter, a former Knoll in the NFL. He was just, running midpoint. So it was one of those things. He was playing in between two guys, and when the quarterback threw it, he closed on Kyron Lacy. Kyron Lacy ended up dropping the ball, but it kind of looked like he was just wide open on a blown coverage, but I don't think that's what it was.
Is there anything going on in regards to, and there probably isn't, or you would have brought it up to me, but of course the high school season is underway and usually it quiets down quite a bit, but what could be the next wave of any kind of targets that announce, or do you expect anything, any kind of movement anywhere before the end of the season?
Oh, there's no doubt. October sets up to be a real big month, if not sooner. Man, the recruiting list at that game in Orlando was huge. I mean, there were studs all over the place. The number one wide receiver in the nation, Jeremiah Smith, was there. You're talking about a guy who's been to Florida State 9 times. This visit makes it like 10 visits, if you count this neutral site game. Cornerback Jamari Howard has been slowly trending to the Noles. Most people say that UF is our biggest competition for him. And if you ask any UF insider, or the ones that I've talked to here recently, they say he's all no, we don't have a chance. He's kind of canceled a couple different trips to UF and come spend multiple days at Florida State. And the word is he's going to be committing soon. So if I were to have to pick the very next commit, it would probably be Jamari Howard at cornerback, 4-star cornerback. But I would not be surprised to see a flip from a guy like Jeremiah Smith. We still got Booker Pickett Jr. out there. I'm not sure if he's going to wait till signing day, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him commit maybe in the month of October as well. We're still trying to flip the Miami guys, Artavius Jones and Josiah Trader. Again, I don't have anything pending on those guys, but I know that the staff is still recruiting them. And there's also some guys out there that can't be really spoken on, guys that are committed elsewhere, top 100 players that this team is going to try to get, be it on signing day or sooner. Mike Norvell and this staff is in a position now where they're going to try to land a top class in the country, whether it happens or not. They're making moves and they're going to try to. The past 3 recruiting days, it's been kind of like, or national signing days, it's been kind of like surviving, keeping everybody that you have committed and just, kind of getting through it. This year, they're looking to make a splash and get people talking on national signing day and make a real run for that number 1 spot.
Florida State heads home, tees it up at home for the first time in 2023 against Southern Miss of the Sun Belt Conference. The Golden Eagles coming off a 7-6 campaign. They were one of the few teams that took out Tulane last year, 27-24 under head coach Will Hall. They've got a win under their belts against Alcorn State, 48-14. Got Steve Helwick jumping on board from SB Nation, Underdog Dynasty, and Hustle Belt. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. It was absolutely great week 1 of football. A lot of good games across the board from Thursday all the way until Monday night. And I always like when week 2 comes around because we have a data point on these teams and we know a little more about each team. And just getting to see a team a second time in action. A lot of unexpected results will happen in week 2 also because we rely so much on what we saw in the previous week.
Steve, you were all over the map this past weekend. Tell us real quick about your trip around college football.
It's fun. I did 4 games in 8 days. I started week 0. I did San Diego State, Ohio, and then I flew right basically from San Diego and then 24 hours later, I was in Orlando. I had to fly early because of the hurricane. I did 3 games in 3 nights. I did UCF versus Kent State. That was a blowout at the Bounce House, but great atmosphere there. Their first game is a Big 12 team. Then Friday night, I went down south for Miami versus Miami. Also a blowout, 38-3. Hurricanes won that one. Then I flew back to Texas early Saturday morning, did Houston versus UTSA. Pretty good low-scoring defensive battle. Cougars' first game as a Big 12 team. That was a pretty good atmosphere in Houston, and they got a pretty big win over a UTSA team, which has won back-to-back conference championships. So that was a pretty good four-game and 8-day stretch. Pretty busy then.
Wow.
Well,
and I thought
Steve,
my trip to Orlando was tough.
well, Steve, set us up for Southern Miss coming in is obviously a heavy underdog, but still a pretty capable football team, bringing back one of its top receivers, quarterback Frank Gore at running back, who ran for about 1,400 yards last year, and an FCS win in week 1.
Yes, Southern Miss is a team that I think can contend in a Sun Belt this year, which seems to be pretty wide open. There's a lot of good teams in there. There's James Madison, Coastal Carolina, South Alabama, Marshall, even though they underperformed in week 1. There's a lot of good teams in that conference. And I think Southern Miss can fight into that upper echelon this year. They were 7-6 last year. They won a bowl game. But one thing that Southern Miss was really lacking was good quarterback play. They rotated between 4 quarterbacks last year. They never really found a viable solution. But this offseason, they got a couple guys from the transfer portal, including Billy Wiles, who was a former walk-on at Clemson, played very sparingly at Clemson, but did have some experience. And then Holman Edwards, who was a backup quarterback at Houston. So they brought those 2 guys in, and now they're trying to have a better passing offense, which looks like it's the case after Billy Wiles' debut against Alcorn State. Now, it is an FCS opponent, but having a quarterback that Southern Miss relies on is really big going into this year, because this is a team that have capable defenders. Jay Stanley is all Sun Belt. He's going to be playing on Sundays one day. And then Frank Gore Jr., who's a running back who set a bowl record in rushing yards last year, is really the centerpiece on the offense. So now having a quarterback to complement those good pieces Southern Miss already has in place, this is going to be a good team, but the challenge is Florida State's on the other side. And this is a much tougher Florida State team than Southern Miss battled in the 2017 Independence Bowl.
That's right. That was who coached that game, George, when Jimbo left?
It was Odell Haggins, right?
Yeah, Odell Haggins, and let's see. I think it was a kind of deal where Odell Haggins was the interim head coach, and then Bryles just kind of handled the offense, and the same thing with the defensive staff. But yeah, wow, that was a rough time in Florida State history. It's been a long kind of climb, if you will, to use Mike Norvell's terminology, to get here. But I know y'all's coach has a history with Norvell. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to maybe fill us in on that, their history together and kind of the familiarity between the 2 schemes heading into the matchup.
Yes, they were D2 players in the same conference. I forget the exact schools. One was North Alabama. There was other D2 player in there. And they played in the same conference, and there was a common connection in the coaching staff as well, which eventually got Will Hall onto Memphis's staff with Mike Norvell in 2018. So Will Hall was an offensive assistant at Memphis. He said earlier in his press conference this week that he watches Florida State on a weekly basis just because it's Norvell's team. So this is a team that he's studied for a long time, and he's very impressed with Jordan Travis and everything that Florida State has to offer. He's even said that this team is they played Alabama in 2021, and he thinks that this team is even tougher than that Alabama team that they played 2 years ago, which that's saying a lot about this Florida State team. So he has very high respect for Norvell and this team.
Yeah, as a fan, man, you love to hear that, the kind words, you know. But for the team, I'm like, man, that's some rat poison right there. Don't believe him, okay? It's a nice compliment, but don't believe him. You haven't made it yet, but yeah, that is pretty cool. I kind of figured that there'll be a lot of kind of similarities between the 2 teams. Y'all's defense, I heard, or from what I saw, played a pretty good game in y'all's win against Alcorn State, but not much on the side of like havoc rate, sacks, etc. What do you think the kind of key is for y'all's defensive line to kind of make some splash plays and hang in there in the first half of this game?
Well, Southern Miss's defense in week 1 was kind of backwards of what we saw in the 2022 season. In the 2022 season, this was a team of backfield invaders. They'd get tackles for loss. They caused a lot of havoc on opposing running backs, but that was not the case against FCS opponent Alcorn State. They allowed 6.3 yards per carry, almost 200 rushing yards. They did not excel in that area at all. But where they did excel was the area where they struggled last year, and that was the passing defense. They allowed 0 first half passing yards, which you can't really do any better than that, and only 44 for the total in game, which is currently ranked 4th in the FBS. They got a pair of interceptions, both of them belonging to Jay Stanley, who's going to be the guy you're going to want to watch throughout this game. Jay Stanley, he wears number 7 for Southern Miss, and he was an all Sun Belt safety last year, had 5 interceptions. He had 2 interceptions in his opener, and those weren't opportune interceptions where he was waiting for a ball or someone tipped the ball and he just happened to be in an area. No, these were balls where he laid out his body and ended up on the ground, just making these impressive snags, which just shows that if you throw a ball in his area, I mean, Jay Stanley's going to be in the mix to catch it. So he's going to be the top guy in the secondary to watch. And then elsewhere on defense, it's going to be a hard matchup with these corners because we saw what Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, and Florida State's receiving core is capable of last week. And Southern Miss brought in a pair of transfer cornerbacks to start this year, Quest McNeil and MJ Daniels. MJ Daniels is the one I really want to watch because he's 6'2", 6'3". He's a bit taller, can keep up with those taller Florida State receivers. And it's going to be as tough as a matchup as you'll get because I think FSU has a top 3 receiving core in the country with Ohio State and Washington in terms of their top 2 receivers. So I think Southern Miss's defense is going to be in for a tough one this weekend, and they don't really have an established pass rusher yet that's going to cause havoc on the back in the Florida State backfield. So gets a little nervous about that.
How good is this team going to be most likely this season, Southern Miss?
I think this is a team that could get 8 to 9 wins. I look at the schedule. I think they could produce something similar to a season that South Alabama had last year. I really like what's going for them on offense. The skill positions are good. Jacarius Caston, great number 1 receiver. He's going to replace Jason Brownlee, who just made the Jets 53-man roster as an undrafted free agent. He's great in space, slippery receiver. He's going to be a star. And now that Southern Miss seems to have quarterback play, which was one thing they struggled with last year, the receivers are going to go so much better this year. They haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since Quez Watkins, who's now with the Philadelphia Eagles, in 2019. So it's been a while. And then Frank Gore Jr., that's self-explanatory. Anyone who watched his bowl game last year knows what he's capable of. Had 329 rushing yards in that game. He's a son of an NFL legend, Frank Gore, 3rd all-time in rushing yards. And he's very similar, not the fastest guy on the field, but breaks tackles really well, has good vision. And Frank Gore Jr., he's played a lot of Wildcat before because Southern Miss, there were instances where they didn't have a quarterback on the depth chart last year where he'd have to field snaps and he would throw passes, and he threw 3 touchdown passes last year. So might want to watch for some Frank Gore Jr. Wildcat if Southern Miss wants to mix it up on Saturday. But I do think that Billy Wiles is the best quarterback Will Hall's had in his entire tenure here.
George, anything else?
No, man. Thanks for coming. If I was gonna ask anything else, I was thinking about something I wanted to ask you, but it's hard for me. I got ADHD. I'm bad about it. But no. I guess is there anything you're looking for? I guess because I mean, I'm guessing you're not picking Southern Miss to win the game. Is there anything kind of in particular you want to see from your guys in this game? I know you mentioned you wanted to see those cornerbacks out there, and I saw one of the comments under there. It said it sounds like Southern Miss may be more assignment sound with their DBs than LSU. From your kind of definition of the defense, it is kind of the opposite of LSU, who had a great front 7, but not very much going with the DBs.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about Southern Miss's offensive line going into this game. They allowed 4 sacks in the opener to an FCS opponent, and conversely, they got 0 sacks on this FCS opponent. So they did not have the best showing in the trenches, really mixing it up in the offensive line. There's a few returning guys, but also some young guys, even freshmen that are in the rotation that haven't really had much experience yet. So one thing is if Frank Gore Jr. needs to have a good day, they need good offensive line play. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen because Florida State's defense, they have some good bodies in there. I mean, Jared Verse is as talented as a pass rusher as anyone in the country. He's someone who can really disrupt opposing offensive lines. And then I really like what Florida State brings with the linebacking core. Tatum Bethune, we saw him suplex slam Jaden Daniels last week. And then Kalen DeLoach is another guy who I'm looking forward to coming around the edge. So I think those guys might be a little too much for Southern Miss offensive line to handle. So I just want to see if Southern Miss can provide enough in the trenches for Frank Gore Jr. to thrive and get his. Because in 2021, when Frank Gore Jr. played Alabama, that was not the case, and he ended up with 7 rushing yards on 9 attempts. So let's see if he can get a better day here in Tallahassee.
So Steve covers everyone. Steve is not a Southern Miss guy. He just he
Oh, okay.
blankets everyone. He knows all of college football, kind of like me. He tries to cover and does cover everyone. So you can talk to Steve about anybody. And Steve's my go-to when it comes to. I've got a number of freelancers that are out there that contribute to the channel for specific teams. But man, if I've got no team, I hit up Steve because I know he'll deliver, and he knows everyone. So what's this travel schedule look like this weekend?
Actually, just due to family obligations, not taking a game this week, but I'll be back for week 3 and looking forward to games. But I'll still be watching some this week, and I have a few previews out already. So looking forward to some good games. Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, Tulane, UCF, Boise, Oregon, Texas Tech. It's going to be a good week of football.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think we're going to find out a lot more about some of these conferences. The Pac-12 is off to an amazing start at 13-0, but pretty much about half the conference is lined up against quality competition. So we'll know more about the Pac-12 in particular. And the ACC, I got to say, a lot of detractors out there would point to Clemson, but of course, Clemson lost to another conference opponent. So for me, that is not a black mark on the conference. Now, if you believe Clemson was supposed to be the team, it's not good news for the ACC. But otherwise, Florida State takes out LSU, which I believe to be the best win of the weekend. And North Carolina with a win against South Carolina, arguably the second or third best win of the weekend. So really good look from the ACC. I know it's only a couple games. Virginia lost to Tennessee. That's totally understandable and expected. But do you think we can take anything away from a good week from the ACC?
Yeah, man. My bad. Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina, they had a really good game against South Carolina, even though Drake May made a couple mistakes in that game. It wasn't Drake May's best game, but I'm really promised of what North Carolina's defense showed in that game too. So I think that North Carolina is a team that could probably vie for one of those New Year's Six Bowls. I mean, they had 9 wins last year, and Mac Brown, he's done a good job rebuilding that program, which wasn't really in some of the best conditions when he took it over. So I think that North Carolina's definitely a team to watch. And I've been high on Duke the entire time. Those defensive backs for Duke, they were flying around. Mike Elko, he had coached some really good defenses at Texas A&M, and he set his footprint on Duke's program the second he walked in, pitching a shutout in last year's opener against Temple, getting 9 wins. And if you look at those losses last year, they were all really winnable games. I think they were all by 1 score. So Duke was pretty close to, not too far from undefeated last year, and almost won the Coastal. I know the ACC Coastal doesn't exist anymore. And Riley Leonard's just a tough runner overall, has some good skill position guys around him. Duke is just a well-balanced team, and their defense can continue playing like this. I mean, there's a lot of winnable games on that schedule. So I think Florida State's a playoff team. I tweeted it before the season, but I'm kind of curious to see who's going to play them in the ACC title game in this new divisionless conference.
I cannot talk enough about Duke. It's astounding to me what they've accomplished. It's unbelievable. Before Mike Elko got there, they'd lost 17 of 18 games in the ACC, 1 in 17 in the ACC. And he suddenly, boom, he walks on campus and they're a good football team. 9-4 bowl victory last year. And as Steve mentioned, usually when a coach elevates a team from, let's say, 4-8 to 8-4, that's a really nice job. But usually you can see in those 4 losses that they're nowhere close to being able to compete with the top of the league. And they did. They were in every game, 1-score losses, and basically a holding call away from defeating North Carolina, which would have landed them in the ACC championship. And Steve, this is something that hit me in preparing for all the teams this summer that I'd never seen before. Duke brought back every pass reception. Everyone that caught a pass came back. Everybody that rushed for any yardage, 1 yard, they all came back. Every yard on offense came back from the previous season. That was astonishing to me.
Yeah, and it showed.
18 to 21 starters, 10 on offense. Yep.
My thing, you mentioned about them dropping the divisions in the ACC. That's kind of what I was going to ask you about earlier when I started to talk. It's funny, the past 2 or 3 years, and if you've been covering nationally, like the top 5 or 6 teams in the ACC, it seemed year in, year out, were always Atlantic teams. So you got these Atlantic teams just eating each other up, and the Coastal has been kind of a disaster. And then as soon as they do away with the divisions, like y'all talked about, all of a sudden Duke and North Carolina are, fighting for that top slot in the ACC, and you've got really 5 or 6 pretty good teams. Like you said, kind of Duke beats Clemson, so it's just seen as, oh, it's terrible. If it was an SEC, it'd just be a, quality loss. But who do you have winning the ACC this year? Well, I guess Florida State, but you said you'd be interested to see who makes it. Is there anybody you're leaning towards? Who do you think you leaning? Duke, North Carolina, Miami?
I'm going to lean toward North Carolina, but being at Miami's opener, I have to say that the Hurricanes, they're going to have a pretty good bounce back season. I mean, they have a really good defense. They didn't take a play off against Miami, Ohio. And Miami, Ohio had a lot of established guys on offense, and the Hurricanes didn't allow explosives. They didn't really allow anything in the run game, and they played a pretty good quarterback pretty well, but I still think that North Carolina is going to be my second place team in the ACC. I think Florida State goes to the playoff. Not sure if they go in at 1 loss or undefeated, but I do think that Florida State's a juggernaut this year. I've been saying it ever since the Cheez-It Bowl last year. And North Carolina is probably the team I'm going to go. I usually like to trust quarterbacks that are as good and established as Drake May. I mean, we saw Kenny Pickett take Pitt to an ACC title a few years ago. So it's always good to bank on the conference's best quarterbacks in this one. And I said it was a mistake late in game against South Carolina, but still North Carolina came out victorious by 2 scores in that game. And I couldn't have been more impressed by the Tar Heels in that effort.
With the defense playing like it is, like you said, with the Drake May, man, they're going to be tough. They're a tough out for sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen North Carolina tackle and hold up at the point of attack against a decent team in forever like they did. Like they came out like I didn't recognize their defense whatsoever. So they found something, figured something out, motivated guys, did something between last season and this season because Spencer Rattler was running for his life. And we'll also say, don't forget about Pitt. And also we'll find out a lot about NC State hosting Notre Dame on Saturday. So that'll be the testing ground for NC State and Brendan Armstrong. Steve, we appreciate you being here. Everybody catch Steve's work at Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty on SB Nation. And you can follow Steve on Twitter. There you see it there, S_Hellwick. He's a great follow. So get on over there, check out Steve's work. Steve, appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Anytime.
All right. Good stuff from Steve. Southern Miss and Florida State shouldn't be much of a game, but I'm looking at maybe Florida State wins this thing by 24, 28, something in that range. I don't think it's really going to matter. They could probably win by 40 if they wanted to. I don't think Southern Miss is a bad team. Just, we're just talking about arguably the best team in the country versus the 70th best in the country.
Yeah, I don't see Mike going out of his way to run the score up, especially like Steven said, these guys played college football together and he was on the staff at Memphis, so there's no ill will there. Definitely a lot of respect between these two guys. I'm expecting them to get up big and hopefully to see a lot of young players get some real time in the game. Maybe get to see Rodemaker and even a little bit of Brock Glenn maybe in the fourth quarter. In a perfect world, that's what I think Norvell is going to want to see. But I've seen crazier things. They could make it a game in the first half and force the team to, kind of face a little bit of adversity. We'll see. They're going to be riding high, and they've said all the right things. Norvell came out the first day of practice and was super complimentary of the team as opposed to last year after beating LSU. He came out and it was, oh, they're this and, think they've arrived, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a good sign headed into the game. So there shouldn't be any drama. Also, it being a night game, no noon game hijinks where it's, everybody's still half asleep. So should be smooth sailing.
Falconer TRX, appreciate you being here. Florida State looked good. The 17-17 quarterback scramble to first down, I think he means the score was 17-17 all. And I'm guessing Jordan Travis had a big scramble. I don't necessarily remember that, but.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the specific play that's going to be in the third quarter there. But he made a lot of big plays, man. I think That play, I'm not sure if it was a fourth down. He made multiple fourth downs. But also I'd say another thing like that, Falconer, I'm sure you probably love that play, the 4th and 2 play to Toafili as well, that got down to the goal line. That was pretty awesome. There were a lot of plays when that game was kind of in the balance when we took control there.
Absolutely. And I said it after the game when we got together that on the flip side, LSU's up a field goal coming out. Second half, Florida State drives, kicks a field goal. And then either Florida State scored again or it was still 17 all. And Kyron Lacey for LSU dropped a pass on a 3rd and 6 at midfield that gives them a first down at maybe the Florida State 45, somewhere in that range. And that killed a drive, and Florida State's offense was just too hot at that point, and they never looked back after that. All right, good stuff. George, appreciate you being here. What is available on the channel right now?
So tomorrow we're going to be uploading the this week's FSU Real Talk podcast, number 16. Will get uploaded tomorrow at lunch. And I'm getting together. I haven't decided, haven't got it locked in yet, but I'm going to try to get a Southern Miss insider to do a show either Thursday or Friday before the game, and then get ready to do the post-game show in Tallahassee following the Southern Miss game. So if y'all are if you can make it, come see us in Tallahassee. They're going to be doing the tailgate, Chris and James and those guys again like usual. So come see us. But besides that, just hanging out. How what you got going on this week, Mark?
Oh, what don't I have going on this week? Let's see. This is today. Today we had Ohio State live at 11, Oklahoma live at 12:30, Michigan live at 5, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7, and then at 8 o'clock we do a Texas-Alabama preview live stream for about 2 hours with all sorts of guests from Texas and Alabama media. And so, yeah, we've always got it going. Plus, I got a couple outlets that want me to do podcasts for them. And we just did Michigan podcast on Tuesday, in addition to Nebraska Live and Iowa Live. And so, yeah, all sorts of stuff going on here at the Voice of College Football. So lock it in. For those of you that want us to grow here, we've got a Big 12 channel and we've got a SEC channel. And if you don't care about those two, if you want the whole thing to grow, including Florida State, please subscribe because they're all connected. That's first. And the second is that I'm dropping the Renegade Report link, and we need to get George to 1,000 subs, folks. So he's sitting around 380 right now. And so please, I'm typing it in right now. Check out Renegade Report. We make it so easy for you folks. It's right in the chat. The link's right there. You take that link, boom, you go right to Renegade Report, check it out, subscribe, and help out George right there. Falconer TRX says it's great to be a Florida Gator. He is very much saying that tongue in cheek. Our guy Falconer is a Miami fan. Oh, it's great not to be a Florida. Yeah.
Right. I know Falconer didn't. Come on, buddy. It would have to be tongue super deep in cheek if you were him to say that. But yeah, woo, them Florida Gators. Awful confident calling Florida State fans delusional and all this stuff in the off season and yada yada. It's my take the whole time. I've kind of liked Napier. I think they're just kind of stuck where FSU was in 2021. You know, they're in a transition. They've got a young players. They got to find a quarterback. It's just not going to be this year. But I think, you know, they got a decision to make. Is it going to be Taggart or is it going to be Norvell? You know what I mean? Do they need to hold him, fold him? We'll see.
They played one of those kind of games where they didn't get annihilated or blown off the field, but Utah typically doesn't do that to anyone. That's just not how they play. But they got whipped at the line of scrimmage on both sides. They just couldn't run. They couldn't stop the run. They just got whipped by Utah up and down. So they got a lot of work to do. Of course, they're doing it right now in the recruiting trail, but yeah, that doesn't yeah, they have a decision to make exactly. And whether they're thinking, okay, Billy Napier's a good enough game coach and builder of a program. We know he's recruiting as long as they can hold that class together by the time they get to the end of the season. If it's a 4-8 season, they may lose some of those guys. I don't know.
I think that's kind of their big gripe. I think they want him to hire an offensive play caller. I think we'll see how it goes. But the kind of Florida people I've talked to, they kind of, if there's one thing they don't like, it's necessarily they want him to be more of a CEO role and maybe get a play caller in there. But we'll see how it turns out. If they can keep this class together, they'll be in pretty good shape heading into next year. If it falls apart, he's going to be on the hot seat.
LFG, we appreciate you. You just got over to Renegade Report and subbed, so thank you for that.
Appreciate you, buddy.
Also, LFG is letting us know that you Florida State fans will be happy with me. You should go over to our national channel, check out my top 25. You're number one because I just rank based on wins. It's not based on what I think. I don't necessarily think Florida State's the best team in the country, but I think they're, if this keeps up, they might be. But they're close. They're real close. But I just rank on the wins, and that's the most impressive win by far in the country. So for me, in my rankings, Florida State is number one. All right, George. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
We'll do it again next week.
We'll learn a lot about the rest of these teams this weekend.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of teams playing their big games. Yes, in week 2. Everybody join George on Renegade Report, and then after the ball game against Southern Miss right here, the voice of college football.
Catch you guys next time.